Well, greetings, amazing students, and welcome to our lecture for Social Work 701, Direct Practice with Cultural Humility. I'm going to provide your lecture asynchronously today, and so what I'm going to do is go ahead and share my screen, and we will get started with the lecture for today. So first off, welcome to our lecture. Glad to see you all. I'm just making some adjustments to my screen here. As you notice, the purpose of our lecture today will be discussing analysis of interventions with individuals and families, groups, organizations, and communities. If you notice on our syllabus, those topics were actually separated into two different weeks. But what I've done is I've combined both into these weeks intentionally and with reason, because I feel like the content will flow better if I do it this way. And so what I'm going to do here is we're going to talk about interventions. Outcome analysis is essentially what we're discussing. So the reason why we're doing this in a leadership course is because at some point in your careers, if not already, many of you are already tasked with overseeing specific outcomes, either for your caseload, for your clients, maybe for a program or a group of employees that you are having report to you in your role if you're in a leadership role. What's important to understand is the higher you move into leadership positions, the more this is going to become even more important. Reason being is because the outcomes and interventions that you are implementing at lower levels, let's say middle management or direct service applications, are going to be expanded upon in sheer volume. So if you are a director of a program, you are now needing to determine what is the outcome of services for not just a caseload of 10, but maybe 100, 200. If you are a regional leadership position, serving within a regional leadership position, then you may be concerned with the outcomes of 1,000 or more clients. And so what's really important to understand is that you want to have indicators examining and offering insight into the impact of the services that you are offering your clients in whichever field or population you're serving. And so that's what we're going to cover today. So today's lesson is going to be very pragmatic. It's going to be very useful, I hope, information that you can take back into your current jobs even today. So if you notice on this first screen here, we have this term called wake analysis, and we have a picture of a ship here. And by now, you know, I'm sure you already know that I enjoy utilizing analogies in some of my teaching. It's because it makes things, I believe, a lot more practical, takes something from the abstract and makes it a little more useful for us, right? So my dad served in the Navy from when he was 18 all the way up to when eventually he retired from the Navy a few years ago. And in the process of that, there's these folks in the Navy, and this is a sample of a ship here, right? That study the wake that's left behind in a ship. And if you notice the ship here is the wake, right? These waves of white water that accumulate off the side of the ship and off the back here as the water moves its way, as the ship moves its way, pushes through the water in the ocean. And so there's these individuals in the Navy whose job it is to study wake analysis, to examine the wave patterns left behind in the ship. And the reason for that is because, according to wake analysis, individuals who are trained to study this can determine the size of the ship, the health of the ship's engines, the direction it was headed, the pivot, the tilt of the ship, based on the waves, the path that is left behind. Our lesson for today, all right, when we're discussing this notion of analysis and interventions, is much like wake analysis. What we're doing here is we are using data, all right, to inform our decision-making. This will be referred to in certain fields as data-informed decision-making, all right, and in order to determine the impact of services, the output of our input. And so within your agencies, many of you will know that your agency has a mission statement. And then usually most agencies also have a list of values that they adhere to, okay? And then what happens is internally, you have leadership positions who are responsible for motivating, guiding, overseeing the work that's done by the workforce, which ultimately needs to filter down to our customers or clients. Okay. So picture if this is the front of the ship, the mission statement, and we're moving forward in the water, going up towards up and out of your screen. What's left behind here is this wake of all of these other things. right? We have to look back through data, all right, to be able to concretely, definitively say, here's the impact to our clients, because we can have the most solid mission statement in the world. We can have the greatest sounding values. They can be posted all over the walls and the doors of your agency's building. But ultimately, if the outcome for our consumer, for our client, isn't favorable, then we've missed our job as a leadership position. So the examples that I'm going to give you in today's lesson are examples that I myself have implemented or participated in implementing through my leadership and executive positions. These are indicators that I've used at the direct service, middle management, and upper management level, including organizationally, in order to determine our wake. Sometimes, as we've learned through the Navy, in order to see the health of a ship moving forward, we need to look at what it's left behind. And so I'm going to give you techniques and strategies to use to determine what have we left behind within our organization. My hope is that you'll find these useful and you can actually take these back and adopt them within your agencies, okay? So let's take some considerations into effect for agency leadership. One of the things here is that all actions and decisions lead to an outcome. It's important to understand that. Some folks will say, well, I'm not sure, if it's worth taking that action. There may not be an outcome associated with it. There's always an outcome. The question is, are we satisfied with the outcome that comes? So sometimes doing nothing, it still has an outcome. The question is, are we satisfied with that? Okay. And so the question becomes, in leadership positions within an agency or an organization, what benchmarks or outcomes, or what we refer to sometimes as key indicators, are we monitoring? And does it make sense why we're monitoring those indicators? So a lot of times I've seen some great agencies that have indicators, or what sometimes are referred to as benchmarks or outcomes, and they said, these are what's important to us, okay? But then the problem is, when I ask them, do those outcomes align with their mission, you'll find out, well, no, they really don't. And so what we've got is a fragmented sort of compass. You have the agency saying it's pushing one way and focused on one particular service that's provided to the community, but the measuring, the examination of the outcomes of those services aren't consistent with the mission. So there you have some misalignment inherent, okay? So another important factor is can everyone in your workforce, okay, that means literally from your CEO, all right, down to the individual that maybe is a receptionist, okay, can they articulate your agency's outcomes and key indicators? Do they know what the goal of the agency is, what the mission is, and how we're going to get there? That's important. We're going to talk about this notion later of mission drift and how great agencies may find themselves needing to close their doors because although they have a great mission statement on paper, there's no buy-in or awareness of that mission statement amongst all of those who are contributing to those day-to-day efforts, okay? And finally, are the outcomes visible in all levels of the organization, including consumers, stakeholders, and funders? Okay, are the outcomes visible? Does everyone know what has been left behind in our wake? Okay, if our case managers in a child welfare setting cannot tell us what our success rate is within our programming, how many kids successfully graduate from a program, how many end up in permanent, safe homes, how many are adopted out, then we've created a little bit of ambiguity and we're not sure what the impact of our work is. And there's nothing more frustrating for someone who has invested their education, their time, and their money to a field in helping people to not know if their work is making any difference in the community. Okay, so these are important things that we're going to discuss today. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you some examples. Here are some examples of key indicators as defined by child welfare agencies throughout the state of California, right? So in the state of California, a giant system, a giant bureaucracy that needs to have several many policies in place to keep things moving in the right direction as it's been dictated or determined by state leadership. Things like safety, stability, permanency, okay, are key indicators at the state level that services are having a positive impact, hopefully, is what the data would say, on children and families involved in the child welfare system. I'm going to give you examples of these today because that is where my leadership background comes from. And then things like well-being. So one of the things we need to know is not only are our kiddos safe, are they stable, are they in permanent housing, but how are they doing overall? Are these kiddos that are receiving services any better when they leave our program than when they entered it? And so I'm going to give you examples of things. And if you have come from a clinical background, some of these are going to seem very familiar to you. So it says the CANS, right? Child and Adolescent Needs Strength Survey, the CAFIS, sorry about that. I was speaking way too quickly. Child and Adolescent Functioning Assessment Scale. The GAF, which was used in DSM-4, which has changed to this one below, but the GAF was usually was used in the past as the Global Assessment of Functioning Scale. As well as the now under DSM-5, the World Health Organization Disability Assessment Schedule, the HUDAS point 2.0. Now, all of these key indicators will determine to some degree the level of impairment, if you're looking at clinical language here, or the level of improvement of our clients from when they enter our program to the day that they leave our programming. This is important to understand because, again, it all points to, are our kids getting better? What are we leaving behind? If our agency is saying we're about stopping child abuse, right, and promoting the safety and well-being of children in our communities, and our outcomes for well-being are atrocious, then really are we making a difference? If our housing and safety is stable, if kids when they stay with us are fine, but they leave having addressed any of the trauma that they've experienced in their lives, then are we being as effective as we can as an agency? So again, just another example, okay? So I want to talk to you briefly about this study that was done called the Hawthorne study, which led to a notion which in leadership we refer to as the Hawthorne effect. On the right here, you see this really nice, fancy office. Isn't that nice? I think that's really fancy. I wish sometimes my office looked like that, but it does not. So let's go with this study here. There was a study that was done called the Hawthorne study in which employees were told that they were participating in a study examining natural lighting or different types of lighting in a work environment. And they were told that research indicated that the better quality lighting that was in a workplace, the more efficient and productive workers were. And so what happened is that a crew would come in and they took those dingy old bulbs out of the workplace and they cleaned off all the covers and they put in some new, nice, fancy, higher quality bulbs. And what happened is they monitored the productivity of the workforce in that office. And what they determined was productivity did in fact go up a little bit. So then a crew came in a little bit later and they changed out those bulbs that were in the lighting fixtures with higher quality bulbs than the ones before. And guess what happened? Productivity rose again. Now, a third time, the crew came back, and this time what they told employees is that they're changing the bulbs out with even higher quality bulbs, but really they were the same quality bulbs, changed them out, put them in, and guess what? Productivity rose again. They did that one more time. They replaced the bulbs with the same ones, but let everyone know that the quality of these bulbs was higher than all the rest. And guess what? Productivity rose again. The object of this study was not truly to examine the quality of lighting as its impact on productivity. What it really was studying is this key indicator here on the left, the alteration of behavior by the subjects of a study due to their awareness of being observed. In short, in leadership, we use the Hawthorne effect in our leadership style to address that most often than not, when your workforce is aware that you are monitoring, that you have established key indicators like these on the right, to view performance, that many employees as a collective workforce will rise to those indicators because they know they are being observed. Think about it in a very practical sense, one-on-one. Have you ever had a boss that you were just kind of like crazy annoyed with because they harped on you being on time all the time? And maybe you're a punctual person. Maybe you hate being late yourself, right? But suddenly you wake up in the morning and you're terrified that one thing's going to happen to throw off all of your morning schedule. And now you're going to be late and now you're going to hear it from your boss. And so you're fixated on every morning waking up and making it into your place of work on time because you don't want to hear it from your boss. This is a mini version of the Hawthorne effect. Knowing what your boss is watching creates an awareness in your head and you change your behavior as a result of it. Maybe some of you say, I'm going to skip that extra cup of coffee and go into the office a little early. Some of you say I may wake up early. Some of you may even say I'm going to shift my morning workout routine to an afternoon routine purely because I don't want to hear it from my boss. This is a result of the Hawthorne effect, okay? But we're gonna talk about using it for good, not for evil, right? So the Hawthorne effect, all right, with leadership is really an examination of a couple of things. We look at quantitative trends. Quantitative trends are your empirical evidence, your data that you establish based off of these key indicators, whatever it is you choose in your agency to address and measure that is aligned with your mission, your purpose of your agency, combined with qualitative data. You need both. You need quantitative and qualitative data. Qualitative, as you know, is the storytelling, the anecdotal evidence, right? The testimony of clients, of consumers, of stakeholders, of employees, right? And those that we serve. You need to combine both of those together to give you a holistic understanding and examination of what is the impact of your agency's services. If you lean too far into only the quantitative, right, only the statistical evidence, you may miss the human element. And in social work and the work that many of you have been called to do in your careers, if we miss the qualitative evidence, then what we're doing is we're missing the heart behind what we do. And so we need a balance of both, okay? So, middle management educators. So what I'm going to do here is apply this Hawthorne effect, all right? This is what I'm going to share with you over the course of my career. Here are some effective tips for measuring middle management indicators. Middle management would qualify as supervisors, okay, leads within teams, those that oversee the work of several individuals who are reporting to them, but they themselves also report up to a higher level, such as maybe a director or an assistant director or something like that. I emphasize and started with middle management for a reason. It is of my experience and opinion that some of the most critical positions of leadership within our agencies are those serving in middle management positions. Some individuals, and you're aware of this if you've served or are serving in a supervisor position now, your responsibility is to serve two teams simultaneously. You're serving the teams that you're overseeing. So you're trying to be a good leader, you're trying to communicate your needs to that group of employees and oversee the work that they're doing. But also you're responsible to report the progress, the obstacles, challenges, whatever the case is to work, to your upper management. And so for that reason, these folks really is where the rubber meets the road. Whatever my vision is as an executive leader or as a regional director or as a director, I need to make sure that that information is not only disseminated to my leadership positions, middle management, but also is disseminated to my direct care frontline workers. Your supervisors are critical in that because your staff that are working in direct care positions may see you a few times a week, but you're running around with meetings, maybe you're traveling to different regions, you're sitting with auditors and accreditors and all these sort of things and stakeholders and donors. You can't count on your mission or your vision, all right, being disseminated every day purely by your presence. What you need are for individuals who are leading your teams to disseminate your information on a daily basis. And that is your middle management. And that's why I'm starting here. So I don't start with middle management because I see them as the lowest end of our spectrum in terms of leadership. I'm seeing them as one of the most essential to creating a bridge between the vision of executive leadership and the agency, right? And it making its way to our frontline staff who are in the trenches every day serving those who are our consumers for our agency. So here are some of those indicators that I looked for from our middle management to have a handle on, a grasp, and be prepared to report to upper management on regarding progress, obstacles, challenges, right? Weekly paperwork. The weekly paperwork that some of you are completing now or you're collecting from your employees, this is essential. Weekly trackers, I'm going to share all this with you. Results reviewed and discussed by weekly management in weekly meetings. And so my expectation was for middle management to go ahead and be meeting with frontline staff every single week. And after they've received this information, now they gather with them and they talk about how's that going. The services that you offered, the strategies, the therapy, the funding, the resources, did all of that have the intended impact with your clients that you had hoped? And if they said, well, some of it did, some of it didn't, let's talk about that and then let's update our plan and tinker with it, right? When we meet, I'd like to talk about maybe 3 of the strategies that have been the most challenging for you this week. Let's talk about why, and let's develop a plan to go into next week, hoping for a better outcome with this revised plan. All right. And then there's monthly paperwork that's completed. If any of you have worked in child welfare, social services, the county, you are aware of this, right? There's daily, weekly, and monthly paperwork all coming in. That is the responsibility of middle management to have an accurate picture of what is in on time, what's late, what are those notes saying related to the outcomes of our clients, and are we adapting to the situations presented in our work in a timely fashion to meet the indicators of our agency and our clients, okay? So weekly, monthly documentation, some examples of what I've implemented within my agency: Outlook calendars. Every single employee that worked within my agency not only had to have an Outlook calendar active, but submit a copy of their Outlook calendar on a weekly basis. Usually it was every Friday by end of business for the following week. And the reason for that is there's a saying in management, and we're going to talk about it later in the term, called plan your work, work your plan. We need to be intentional with our time, because many of us know that in a social work application, we're also dealing with a lot of crisis amongst our consumers, our customers. And so for that reason, we need to be intentional in the use of our time. There were weekly agendas and minutes. If any of you have served in case management positions, you are very aware of this. Weekly notes, if individuals, professionals, practitioners were meeting with individuals one-on-one for therapy, case management, resources, advocacy, that was all documented, in addition to weekly tracking logs, mental health activity reports, Medi-Cal billing, all of that good stuff, as well as documentation related to weekly supervision. So all of these things here are tools that I'm going to offer you and show you. So before I do that, I want to give you actual examples of what I tracked, what I built as trackers. The reason why I want to do this, because it serves a practical example. So I stepped into a leadership position in a private nonprofit agency, larger one in Orange County as its base, but it's also known for its services throughout Riverside County. When I did that, I entered as a supervisor. It was my job as a supervisor to track my caseload alone. Later, I was promoted into a director position, and the program that I was promoted into, that director position, was also a new program within its first 3 years of its contract with Riverside County. My job internally with my agency was to expand that program. We started with 35. When I left the agency, probably 8 years later, about 8 years later, I had grown the program to 300, and it was now officially the largest program of that kind in the state of California. Now, the reason I'm not telling you that to brag or to try to impress anyone, I say this only because many of you may be saying, well, these may just be examples of things that I've used. But when I share these examples with you, I want you to also understand they've had a direct impact on the growth, the vitality of a region and of an agency that led to a large contract, right, within the state of California. And so I want to share these with you. If you notice, this is for a wraparound program. I won't reveal the agency, but what I really am going to do is share with you the exact tracking. This is the actual tracker. If you notice, it is broken up by fiscal year. When you are working within an agency, particularly any agency within child welfare or any business whatsoever, it's tracked on a fiscal schedule, which means your budget in your budget year starts on July 1st and ends on June 30th of the following year, okay? And so you notice I've broken this up. That's important to note, because what you want basically is for data to be tracked by fiscal year. This will allow you to recognize what you did in 1 year of service, how you did financially. You can examine the growth or the decline of services, of clients, whatever the case is. And what you see are clients' names here. Obviously, we're not using the entire name. The number of cases, I tracked every single kiddo that entered our program from day one, where they were located, when they started, okay? Talking about status here of were they foster youth, probation youth, mental health, whatever the case was. And these are all the active caseload data here, right? So where did they fall under and where did they live? Now, if you notice here, what I also did was we tracked the outcomes of these. This is the wake analysis, right? This is what we left in our path. If you notice, this team one, all right, AKA their name that they gave themselves was Flip Mode, was carrying 13 cases at this point in fiscal year 15-16. And when they closed so far for the year, they were running at a very high graduation success rate. Their outcomes were phenomenal. What this told me is that this team was demonstrating the key indicators of safety, permanency, stability, and well-being amongst our clients. I'm going to give you further background and detail on that in a second. So this is an example of a client tracker. Now, in this course, if you're ever interested in hearing more about some of these tools, all you have to do is reach out to me and I'm happy to go over these individually with you. Welligent, if some of you are familiar with mental health Medi-Cal billing, you've definitely heard of Welligent. There are a number of other software programs that are out there that are used to monitor mental health billing, in particular, Medi-Cal billing, and the counties have their own systems as well, some of which will merge with outside systems like these, such as Welligent. Our agency used Welligent as our mental health tracker. The point is, when I looked at middle management indicators, here's another thing that was important to know. Within Medi-Cal billing, you're responsible for billing X number of hours of service, and you're reimbursed from that from the government. As a result of that, usually at the county level, who in turn has received that funding from the state, so on and so forth. If you notice, they're broken up by role. So I've got facilitators here, I have behavioral specialists here. Obviously, I've gotten rid of the names of our clients for obvious reasons due to confidentiality. Here's where it tells me where these facilitators are at in reaching their goal of their minimum billing expectations. I want to clarify here, it is not a quota, right? If a client, or I'm sorry, a facilitator is unable to meet their goal for their billing, that's understandable. Sometimes people go on vacation. Sometimes clients dodge you, right? Sometimes they hit the door, slam that as soon as they see you coming. They never show up to therapy, whatever the case is. However, there needs to be a narrative to that, but we need to see at any given time where the performance of our facilitator group is when we're managing a mental health contract of up to $8 million, okay? And so it's important to understand that here. And so these are some indicators. So if you notice here is the percent to goal, the total hours billed by each individual, and the number of actual mental health notes completed by that person, all right? So what we do here is there's no secret to this. This is posted every single Friday after documentation has been submitted for the week, and everyone knows where they stand with one another in the program, okay? It's all transparent. It's all an indicator. Here, and this is more for management themselves, middle as well as upper management and executive management, to determine, don't get distracted by all these numbers. It's an absolute mess to look at. Just focus on, really quickly, the red circles. So if you notice, I've got a quarterly summary here, and I've got some numbers here randomly circled at the bottom. Quarterly, if you are an upper management position, you need to know where you are performing monthly and quarterly in regards to your fiscal budget. So within my role, I was responsible for managing about, at the height of our programming, it was somewhere around, I think, just shy of 20 million for our agency. This is one of many reports that I had to review on a monthly basis. Sometimes in rough months, we're looking at it weekly. Sometimes when things were smooth sailing, we're looking at it quarterly to determine where we are in our revenue. This is the actual dollar amount that we are expecting to be reimbursed for services based on the performance of these individuals, right? And so their notes equate to services. Those services equate to Medi-Cal reimbursement. And guess what? That keeps the lights on, that pays salaries, right? That pays for promotions, new positions, expansion, and all of that. And so from an executive leadership side, I needed to see where we were quarterly with our billing, and this is per group. So this is what the facilitators produce that quarter. This is what our behavioral health specialists produce that quarter, and so on and so forth by role. These are key indicators. Some of this, and I recognize that if some of you are in upper management positions, you're saying, isn't this sort of rudimentary? If you're saying that, then I'm glad you are, because it means you're aware that we need to keep a lens on this. What's important to understand, though, is in several sectors, particularly of child welfare, this practice here isn't always a standard within leadership positions. Most of the time in child welfare positions, we hire folks because they're like all of us. They have huge hearts. They want to make a difference in the lives of children or families or individuals without housing, right? Or individuals without citizenship, whatever the case is, whatever marginalized population they're serving. What that sometimes doesn't make us is inclined to be solid business practitioners. And in my career, when I first started my casework, I had no interest in monitoring these reports, right? I was only worried about, were my numbers good? right? Did I produce, was I this, because I was an overachiever, right? Was I at this 146%, right? If I was, life went on. It wasn't until I moved into upper management positions that I realized that in order for me to keep my job, in order for other employees to keep their job, in order for this agency to expand and grow and not stay static, to weather storms of financial crisis, of COVID, of whatever the case is, if we wanted to be around for the next 20 or 30 years, someone in our agency needed to pay attention to these performance indicators. It was then that I understood and began to value the time that I spent in these areas. Now, how I communicate to the staff is going to be really important, and I'm going to share that with you in a second. Finally, one more report. All of the kiddos that are receiving Medi-Cal billing need to be run for Medi-Cal eligibility. And guess what? They need to do that every single week. There's a lot of technical factors involved with that. Here's what I want you to understand, though, is that when I'm overseeing an agency of 300 children and families, and you need to run Medi-Cal eligibility on about 95% of those folks every single week, this becomes a task in and of itself. So you're going to see this eligibility report. This comes out of our quality assurance department. They're running this report every single week for every single client that we have in our program, so that when I look at these numbers here, they are accurate numbers, okay? That's the type of attention to detail. What you see here is this nice little form, right, where it's really clean. Are they eligible? Yes or no, and all this kind of stuff. What it doesn't show is about 40 hours of work that went behind the scenes in order to generate this one report almost on a weekly basis, okay? So there was a mountain of quality assurance workers who were cranking out numbers and looking at data every single week and compiling that into reports so upper management could review and steer the ship according to how we were doing. This was the wake of services that we left for the quarter, okay? All right, so here's what I'd like to point out. In terms of supervision amongst middle management positions, a couple things to keep in mind is what you're going to want as a standard of best practice for supervision is weekly team supervision. That includes clinical and non-clinical together. So what that looks like within this context is if you are serving, particularly within child welfare settings, you're going to see a combination of professionals that you hire for life experience, professionals that you hire for non-clinical experience with a college degree, and professionals that you hire for clinical experience with a higher education degree and either working towards licensure or have obtained licensure. In certain settings, you need all of those folks together when discussing one client, because everyone's bringing a different perspective to the table. That's considered supervision best practice. Now, weekly individual and group supervision is going to be necessary as well. So employees are going to need time to sit down with their supervisors individually and discuss their performance specifically and how they are doing with these timelines and their notes and all of that, okay? And then what you're going to see is in this case, what we had was wraparound professionals who were clinically informed, but not in licensure positions. And you had mental health clinicians who were either working towards licensure or were licensed, such as LCSWs or LMFTs, LPCCs in a rare occasion, right? Who were needing to talk to one another about their perspectives. And so what's really important to understand here is that these teams met together because if they did not, they would start to look at each other as in competition with one another, as opposed to being in collaboration with one another. And you never want resentment to start to grow between roles and teams within an organization. Healthy competition is okay. Resentment, it can be toxic, okay? Monthly mental health and RAP directors meetings, regional directors meetings, all occurred. And so what I did in a regional director position was meet with my clinical and non-clinical directors to discuss matters related to the program progress and all of those reports, which were filtering into our indicators, our performance indicators as a region. And finally, look at this right here in regards to integration, forecasting, and tinkering, more and more meetings. Look at this right here. More weekly supervision, more role meetings, okay? So this is when we provided coaching, support, guidance to role-specific meetings. All facilitators, all behavioral specialists, or all clinicians, things like that. combined with, if you're moving towards licensure, then you also needed group supervision, right, for your clinical hours and all staff meetings as a region, right? So what's important to understand is that if you are going to oversee an agency committed to high quality services with the intent to look out for the consumer, meaning the kiddos and families we were serving first, and to advance our mission in the community and grow and expand our programming, our spectrum of programming, right? A number of employees, the well-being of our employees, the presence of offices in the region, then you will need to commit to this level of middle management performance in order to do that. Now, I don't want you to be intimidated and say, well, I need to put all this in place within my agency tomorrow, right? No. What we did was this was built over time and started to increase as the volume of our programming and the size of our region increased, right? So we were a region that started with about 4 programs and about 50 employees total in the early 2000s. And when I left 10 years later, we were at about 170 employees, 7 programs, over doubled the budget, had expanded into 2 offices, and were serving all of Southern California all the way up to the Arizona border in Blythe. All right, that is what these kind of systems put in place, all right, can do for an organization's growth. So let's talk about with staff, right? I started with this because some of you are saying, wow, I didn't think that being a supervisor or director involved all of this. And that's some of it. There is actually more that's involved that we're going to talk about and unpack later in this term. Let's talk about communicating with staff. Ultimately, all of this that I showed you, I'm just, I'm flying through these right now. Staff only saw maybe 2 of those reports. And the reason for that, it was because I wanted our direct care staff focused on the well-being of our children and families that we were serving. That's their primary concern and what I wanted for them. I needed them to know what the expectations of their job was, hence the Hawthorne effect, right? I needed them to know where I was measuring the lighting, if you will, but I didn't need them to worry about how much it cost to keep the lights on. I didn't need them to worry about how the switches and the walls were wired to control the lights. I didn't need them to know the temperature of the lights at any given time. I needed them to focus on children and families. And so when I communicated budget needs for our staff, I didn't come out and say, hey, you're $5,000 short of your performance expectation for the month. No. What I asked for, I said, was it looks like you had 12 meetings with this particular client. Let's say it was Susie, right, this month. But I'm looking at the summary report of services, and it looks like that you have 8 meetings documented. So it appears here that you're 4 notes short of documenting the services that are provided. Now, our standard within our agency is we document all services should, God forbid, something ever happen to the client, or we need to go to court and demonstrate the services we've provided. And so for that reason, I'd like for you to go ahead, make up those notes and get them turned in. That will address the shortcoming financially also, all right? But you make it about the consumers that you're serving, not about the dollar amount, okay? Here are some ways that I articulated advancement, right? Benefits of services, impact on clients. In wraparound, we have this wraparound fidelity index, the WFI 0.4 at the time. There's other revisions that have been developed since then. And what it does is it measures the 10 values of wraparound, and we're shooting for an 80% proficiency in each of these. Now, this is measured when our data unit at the county calls families, asks them questions about services, and determines from the family's mouth, as well as one role within our agency, the facilitator, how services were delivered. Based on their responses, they score those responses, and we hope that we hit that 80% mark. Quality programs should be operating for the most part at this area. If you notice, we were there almost for everything except for a couple, right? So for our youth that were reporting team-based, what this means here is there was opportunities for their voice and their advocacy to be brought to more meetings, right? Normal, many of our youth reported that, okay? But we notice here, they also felt like as a family, okay, the youth liked the services that were provided. Natural supports in all areas across the board. quite common in wraparound. Most high performing programs in wraparound also have a need to boost their natural support scores. That's because families are coming with complex needs and are often isolated geographically, emotionally, financially from their support systems. They have burned bridges over the years, and as a result, no one wants to come near them in that sense. And so this is always a number that programs are perpetually attempting. We are almost at proficiency here for being strength-based. That is a very good score for youth. And when we look at things like community-based, we want to involve the youth a little more in the community, and we want the youth to understand better what outcomes we're serving for. Considering, though, that in this program, the median age at this time in the program was about 10 to 11 years old, you know, how much do we want a 10-year-old worried about what the outcome is when we want them focused and settled and safe at home? So again, all of this data tells a story. This is what made it to staff, not the net dollar amount that we expected them to bill every single month. We wanted them to know that they were making a difference. Now, here's another thing that I did was pretty innovative at the time when we wrote proposals related to child service expansion of contracts and funding for existing contracts, okay? So back in the day, the DSM-4 days, we had this GAF, or the Global Assessment of Functioning, right? And so the average GAF score for our kids at the time when they came into the program was 46, marking what we determined in the GAF as severe impairment, all right, of their functioning. The GAF score upon discharge was 53, moderate impairment. This is good. It jumped an entire level. That score seems like a small jump, but in the GAF, this is significant if you've been trained in that. Since 2007, 83% of the children we worked with left with GAF scores that were the same or higher. Now, sometimes social workers would want to challenge me on this. They would say, Dr. Meiko, why would you measure if a GAF score was the same or higher? Don't you want these kids' scores to go up? Absolutely, I do. Here's the thing to consider though. In wraparound, you are serving some of the most severely abused and neglected children that are coming across our doors. High levels of trauma, complex needs, matters of criminal justice sometimes involved, mental health diagnoses involved, substance dependency, homelessness. So for a child's GAF score to remain the same with that level of trauma, okay, is a strong indicator in an environment that is less supervised than a residential setting. They were home with their families. This is something to brag about, okay? And here's a phenomenal number: 0 of the children's GAF scores decreased in their time in wraparound. 36% of those kiddos improved by jumping an entire level. Folks, this is how, with key indicators, it can make a difference for your staff, whether they feel fulfilled, whether they feel their work is making a difference. This plays directly into job satisfaction, right? Our staff shouldn't have to care how much it costs to keep the lights on, but they do want to know if their services meant anything to the families that we are responsible for within our agency. This is an example. And when I provided these numbers every month within our staff meetings, this is what determined buy-in to the agency and the work that we were all doing. Now look at the CAFIS. Just really quickly, I'll show you this. These are just indicators and examples, okay? The average CAFIS score upon intake for our kiddos in this program at this time was 116, which was considered a marked impairment in their functioning. That's the terminology used in the CAFIS. The average CAFIS score upon discharge was 84. In this case, this is good. You want that score to go down on the CAFIS. You want it to go up on the GAF, okay? Which marked a moderate improvement, okay, here. 75% of the children's scores stayed the same, okay, or improved. This is phenomenal. So if I had shown the GAF score alone, that would have been great, right? But we also want a few other indicators to give weight to our data, to be able to demonstrate to children and families, to employees, to donors, to county contract monitors, that the work they're doing, the money that they're paying us matters, okay? Now, remember when I told you that we also need to have a qualitative data balance? We need to be able to tell the stories. This is where I use the testimony coming directly from teams, where every time we met, every team that was in our agency, when I started, it was 1 team. When I left, we were up to 15 teams. 15 teams had one opportunity to share a success, something that brought them joy, fulfillment in their lives and the services they were providing. And those teams talked about what it felt like to make a difference in the children and families' lives that they were serving. This is how we bring data alive, outcomes alive. We are literally highlighting the wake, right, of our ship. And we're making it accessible for all of those involved who are on board our ship with us. Imagine how good that feels, right? Working in an agency where you can brag about your numbers and you know that your employees can talk about key indicators because they're looking at them, they're feeling good about them. In fact, they are sharing them in staff meetings. This is why this notion of outcome analysis is so important, not only to the outcomes, the performance of an agency, but to the agency's culture, okay, within it. Now, what this resulted in when we developed as a team, right, these strategies were things like this that benefited the agency and the employers they're working for. Staff reported feeling more fulfilled by their work. They said, look, I love the work. I'm exhausted too. I'm driving literally from Riverside some days to Blythe. I see one family and you know what? I want to come back and do it again next week, even though I'm exhausted. Do you know why? Because these stories, this data makes me feel like I'm making a difference. I want to come back. I feel more fulfilled. Cohesive programming fulfills the mission of your agency. So your agency is saying, we are living our mission, we are implementing our mission, we are fulfilling our purpose in the community. Creativity and individual investment increases. When people get to share this, they want to get creative. They want to talk about ways that they broke through with a client that they never expected before. Guess what? Turnover decreases. Now, from a pragmatic executive leadership standpoint, that is a good thing for a couple of reasons. When turnover decreases, guess what? So does the cost of hiring and training new employees. You save money. When turnover decreases, that means that the collective, what we refer to as the collective competency of our agency increases. That means when people stay longer, they learn as they stay. And when they learn, they carry that knowledge with them into the work that you're doing. This is how you have agencies of high competency, because so many folks love working there and you invest time and training into them and they stay and they carry that into the work that they do with families, okay? Other agencies and public entities take notice. This is how, when I would be in meetings with other providers, executive leadership in the county would come up to me and say, hey, Dr. Mako, I'd like to throw a couple of ideas your way regarding some pilot programming. We like the numbers that you're generating. We like what you're doing with the money we're paying you. Would you be interested in starting up a new project with us? Absolutely. Other agencies take notice. Later on, that led to my work in policy at the state level because there were so many eyes on these pilot programs that we were working, collaborating with stakeholders with, okay? And probably what the most important and fulfilling things for me in a leadership position is my leadership philosophy, particularly of servanthood, of servant leadership, which we're going to talk about later in this term, becomes practice. Right? The notion of wanting to make a difference in people's lives now becomes reality. The notion of you leading an agency that does its job well, right, becomes a reality. The reputation of your programming speaks for itself, right? And ultimately, that's very fulfilling in a leadership position to know that your job is making a difference within your agency. So I want to throw out one idea with you, and I know this has been a slightly long lecture, so thank you for hanging with me in some of this arena here. I want to talk about something that we did that was really revolutionary in a nonprofit model that we adopted from the for-profit industry to take this customer satisfaction one step further. If you notice, I talked about the fulfillment of supervisors and of frontline employees. I didn't really talk too much about how do we know our consumers are enjoying the services. This is where this comes in, okay? So think about this. If you work for the county, if you work for a private nonprofit, particularly in child welfare or any private nonprofit really, outside of for-profit, how often do we really view our clients as customers? A lot of the time, particularly think about this in justice settings, probation and things like that, we don't look at the client, the identified client as a customer. We look at them as they have to be there, right? How many times have you seen within group homes, juvenile hall, we don't look at those kiddos, unfortunately, as customers. We say they've been placed there, you know? So if that's the attitude that we're adopting within our organizations, what would our clients have to say about our customer service practices? See, if you want to be progressive and you want to talk about servant leadership, which we're going to address later in this term, you have to view your clients as not only a captive audience, but that we have a responsibility. We're here for the clients. That's why our hearts exist. That's why this field exists. So why would we not want the best customer service possible for our clients? And so the consideration, the question then becomes, how does customer satisfaction impact job satisfaction for our employees, turnover, program growth, contract acquisition, long-term sustainability of an agency? You can have amazing folks working for you, highly competent and skilled. If they treat the clients like garbage, no one's going to want to be served by your agency. And if no one wants to be served by your agency will eventually close its doors. So even, I would argue, in a private nonprofit sector, maybe even more so, we have a responsibility than even in for-profit to treat our consumers as customers. And in essence, what we're saying is treat them with the dignity that they deserve. And so that's what I'm sharing with you. So I want to share with you a really interesting way that we did this in my agency. I give props to our CEO who came up with this idea, and I had the pleasure of walking with him in my region and adopting this and sharing this with staff. All right, this is customer satisfaction data. We are a private nonprofit child abuse prevention agency who also began to accumulate customer satisfaction data. This data came from foster youth. This data came from probation youth. This data came from parents who had adopted children and were trained through our agency. Imagine the notion of a private nonprofit going to a kid in a group home and saying, would you recommend A, B, and C agency to other kids to live here? Pretty amazing work, okay? And so I'm sharing this with you because this is truly innovative. If you want to change the face of the nonprofit industry, here's a good way to do it. So here's what I want to start with. This is national data, and this isn't associated with my agency. This is just what this outcome measure is. And I want to share with you something about this. Customers talk. You know this. Think about this. Have you ever had a negative customer service experience when you walked into a store and were treated awfully? You had a negative experience. Maybe they didn't have anything you wanted. The employee was rude. They were unapologetic, and then they overcharged you for a product that you never wanted. Imagine how bad that is, right? So here's what I want to point out. Over 95% of respondents who have a bad experience said they told someone about it. Right? Think about that for yourself. You tend to be more willing to share a negative customer service experience than a positive one. 87% said they shared a good experience. So look at that, 95% where we'll talk about the bad, 87 the good. Bad experiences were more likely to be shared across each of the social circles identified, and that's here in this chart. So imagine 95% of the people that had a bad customer service experience shared it with friends and family, coworkers, online. They posted it on social media. That company, they said your services were awful, all right? Online review sites, and then some people, didn't share it all. Think about this for a second. The majority of folks it was shared with, though, were friends and family and coworkers. Guess what? Those are potential consumers. Those are all the people that would trust your opinion. And they would say, man, if Dr. Mayko had a bad experience going and buying a car over at that dealership, I'm never going over there because I trust that person. You see what I'm saying? It impacts that. So 72% of individuals were willing to share good experiences related to this. And so here's what we know about customer satisfaction data when we gather it. There's a propensity to share bad customer service amongst typically Gen X, which is the age group of 36 to 50 years old. Okay, 99% were willing of Gen X to share a negative experience. And those that made more than 150 grand a year, 100% of them shared a negative experience. So if your customer base falls in these areas, these categories, they will share if they had a bad experience. These groups were also more likely to share a positive experience, 95% and 100% respectively. So this group, these two groups you want to pay very much attention to if they are groups in your agency, okay? 54% of residents who had shared a bad experience said they would share it more than 5 times compared to 33% of those who had shared a good interaction. So for every 3 times, someone shares a positive, or 33%, 54% are saying, I'm telling someone about it 5 times how bad it was. That negativity gets spread 5 times. 58% of respondents said they were more likely to tell others about customer service experiences now than they were 5 years ago. This is the evolving market. This is what's important to understand. So it no longer is it only Gen X or millennials, okay, that are sharing negative experiences. Everyone on a whole, okay, is thinking of customer service differently than they were 5 years ago. Now let's put this in the context of nonprofit or governmental leadership. We pay tax dollars, right? We have a lot of money taken out of our paychecks. It hurts me. It causes me physical discomfort and makes my stomach turn when I look at my paycheck and I see the taxes that are taken out. So when I go to the DMV and I have a horrific experience, now please, if you're watching this at the DMV, I've actually felt like it's gotten a lot better, phenomenally better. But I'm saying in the past, and I would say even more than 5 years ago, it hurt, right? To go and have to interact. And so what happened was you walk away saying my government tax dollars, the money drained from my paycheck every single month went to this. The dissatisfaction grows. And then what happens? Everyone tells you about their negative experience at the DMV. Transfer that over to private nonprofit now. You are competing for contracts every 3 to 5 years. You're trying to grow. You don't want to shrink in size or in spectrum of programming, right? You want to be around for 20 to 30 years. Can you afford, as an agency, as an executive leader, to have 54% of people sharing a negative experience with your agency 5 times with the people that are closest to them in their lives? Imagine you're a foster family agency, a resource family agency is what we refer to now. And a resource family has a poor experience with your agency. And then they share with 5 friends who are thinking about becoming foster or adoptive parents. Don't go to that agency. I had an awful experience there. Guess what? They're still going to want to foster or adopt a child. They're going to go to another agency. This impacts you and your agency directly. Okay. So, can a private nonprofit afford to provide poor customer service? My argument would be no. We cannot afford it. If you're a government agency, how does your score impact job satisfaction, the mission or the obligation of the community? What if you worked for the county and you're standing in line at a Barnes & Noble excited about some book that you want to buy on a weekend and you're enjoying your Saturday and you hear over in another aisle someone saying, oh, gosh, so-and-so county is the worst ever. They don't fund anything. Their employees are ... And you work for that agency. How awful is that to hear? How do you feel about going into your job every single day? This is why customer satisfaction matters. What ethical implications do poor customer service experiences have for us as practitioners? And let me take that one step further, for us as Christians. We aren't designed as social workers nor as Christians, children of God, to accept mediocrity because we are serving marginalized populations. We can't be okay with providing subpar products. We can't be okay with having an okay therapy session that day. I say this to our social workers and our Masters of Social Work program. I don't want or need more good social workers in this environment. I need great social workers in child welfare. Our kids don't deserve, and our families don't deserve, good services. They deserve great services in order to have their needs met. And so this is an obligation that if you want to become innovative, you can bring into your agencies in a leadership position. So what is this tool? What am I talking about related to job satisfaction and customer service satisfaction? I'm talking about the Net Promoter Score, or the NPS, the Net Promoter Score. If you've never heard of this, I guarantee most of you have seen it at some point. You just didn't realize it's what it was. Here is the Net Promoter Score. It was developed by Bain & Company's founder of Loyalty Practice to measure customer loyalty. Okay, marketing researchers across the field now have utilized this tool because it's simple and it has an ability to be applied to every agency or industry anywhere in the world. Our CEO heard about this, said, this is what I want. I want to be innovative. I want to be responsible and ethical and fulfill our values of our agency by ensuring and looking out for and giving a voice to our consumers, to the children and families we're serving. And so the Net Promoter Score metric asks, and this is how I know you've heard of it before, how likely is it that you would recommend an organization, product, or service to a friend or colleague? Now, here's how I know you've seen this. You ever go to Starbucks? You ever go to Lowe's? You ever go to Target? You ever go to, well, probably not anymore, Dress Barn? My wife liked Dress Barn. So we would go to Dress Barn a lot too. And then here's what would happen at any of those places. Home Depot, anytime that you left that store, what would happen? They'd print out of a survey and they'd say, if you're willing, you could fill out this survey for me online. It would really help. And you would enter, by filling out the survey, enter a chance to win A, B, and C, right? Then if you actually took the survey, this is what you would see. How was your visit today? How satisfied were you with your visit on a scale of 1 to 10? How likely are you to tell someone else about your experience at insert company here in the future? That is the Net Promoter Score. I was in an airport restroom a couple of years ago. I think it was in SeaTac, Seattle-Tacoma Airport. And as I'm walking out of the restroom, obviously pre-COVID, because I don't see this happening now, there was a stand with a green and red button on the stand. And they said, press the button for the experience you had in our restroom today. And I thought to myself, what kind of experience did you want me to have in your restroom today that I need to market, right? But that was an attempt at the Net Promoter Score to say, was it a good experience or a negative experience? In other words, was the restroom clean? Was it orderly? Was it well kept? All that kind of good stuff. Folks, we are surrounded by the Net Promoter Score in the for-profit industry. And what our CEO did here was he applied it to the nonprofit industry in a very unique way. Let's examine this Net Promoter Score a little bit more. So if you wanted to adopt this, you could within your agency. So the Net Promoter Score, all right, it's piled into 3 groups, the scores themselves, okay? And they're called promoters, passives, and detractors, okay? So customers are meant to, based on their score, they're gonna place you, your agency, or that business into this score, okay? So a detractor is a score of 0 to 6. So on a scale of 1 to 10, if you marked your experience at whatever business that you went to, think about your favorite place that you like to go shop. If you were not satisfied and you gave it, you know what, it's a 4 today, then it was a detractor. What that means is you did not have a good experience. You're not going to share it again. Okay. You might actually tell someone, like the statistic said, about 5 people that are close to you, how negative of an experience you had. If you scaled it as a 7 to 8, it was a passive. What that means is that was good, but it still wasn't enough to tell anyone about it. That was a solid experience, okay? And if you had a 9 to 10, if they said on a scale of 0 to 10, how much did you love our services? Is that was a 10? Then what that means is you were excited so much about it, you were going to tell other people about that positive experience, okay? So promoters are our best customers, our most loyal, our most enthusiastic. Think about a brand that you love, that you'll back up no matter what they do, right? Some of you have a favorite brand for some sort of product where you won't even consider, okay, another brand. It doesn't matter what they come out with, you're brand loyal, okay? Those are your fans, and what we call in the business industry, your super fans. They're going to continue to purchase your products, your services, and most importantly, share their good experiences with others. Imagine as a nonprofit CEO that you have super fans in the community. People that said that the work that you are doing with individuals without housing, individuals without citizenship, people with diverse abilities, foster youth, incarcerated individuals. What if people said, I love this organization. This organization is amazing. You need to fund them. You need to support them. You need to give them a spot at the city council meeting. We need to pass laws and have them design them with input, right? This is a super fan of a private nonprofit. Your passives, like I said, they're satisfied. They're not necessarily enthusiastic about the service, right? They're neutral. They're not going to really slam you, and they're not going to talk you up either. And like I said, we have to watch out for those 0 to 6 scores, right? Because they're expressing their unhappiness with the brand. Okay. What's important to understand is passive scores, honestly, those are folks that can go either way. So they didn't have a bad experience. It's like, I guess for me personally, it's something how I'd feel about like a company like Amazon, right? I like Amazon. I like them. I can't say I'm only going to shop at Amazon the rest of my life. If I find a better price somewhere else, I'm going to scoot on down the road and get that better price there. I'm also going to not talk bad about Amazon, right? My package comes on time. They have a product at a good price. Thank you very much. And my life goes on, right? And so those passive scores, what you really want is to move those into promoters. That's the idea behind it. So this is what it is, just a quick one, right? In terms of a total score, to generate for your NPS score, if you're a 30 to 100, you're doing great. That's what you want, right? If you are a 0 to 30, you're satisfied but not enthusiastic, you're passive. And as a company, if you have a score of negative 100 to 0, that's no bueno, right? That is not good. We want to start moving out of that immediately, or you will be moving out of your office immediately, right? Because there will be no more office to be left, right? There's no business that exists there. And for the formula, what you're looking at is how to calculate this. And this is how we do this. So the Net Promoter Score equals the percentage of promoters minus the percentage of detractors. Or what you could do is you could take the Net Promoter Score, which would equal the number of promoters divided by the total respondents of your surveys, okay? And minus the number of detractors divided by the total respondents. So I'm giving you this formula because if later you want to implement this within your agency, you'll know how to calculate that. Now, with that said, I want to have a little fun here, and then we'll wind down the lecture for today. I know I've thrown a lot at you. And thank you for being a good sport. Let's take a look at some Net Promoter Scores of some of maybe what are some of your favorite companies, and let's see what they have to say. So I just threw this out here, right? And I said, what if we did this in a nonprofit place? What if we set the tone for customer service in a nonprofit industry or a government agency? What if we cared, right? What people thought of our brand, right? In a nonprofit setting. And let's look at some for-profit scores who are here to make a profit, who rely on promoters, right? To meet the bills, to pay the bills. Let's see what they've got. Now, first off, I'm sorry about the lines here. I apologize. Like these, for some reason, aren't broadcasting nicely on the PowerPoint. But let's look at Apple really quick. So Apple's up here. Look at their Net Promoter Score of 47. Remember, 0 to 30, you're doing great. So that's a good score. Look at Google at 11. Not great, right? But not awful. You might be shocked to see, look at Coca-Cola, 0. This is a detractor score. This is no bueno, right? So what happened to Coca-Cola? Interesting. Look at Disney recently. Disney at a -7. I wonder, though I don't know for sure, did this have any reason why? Maybe, you know, Disney Plus came out to help compete with some of the content being available through Netflix and Amazon Prime and all these other things. But Disney at a -7. Check that out. Now, if you go to this website here, if you're curious about this data and you want to unpack this more, because it really is fascinating data, go to the website, click on any of the brands that you're interested in. It'll actually break down the survey, the scores, everything. This is all public, okay? So you can check this out. Let's look at Louis Vuitton really quick. Louis Vuitton has brand loyalty. We're talking about 40 promoters here, right? A score of 40. They're saying, I am loyal to Louis Vuitton. I'm not going to shop anywhere else. That makes sense when Louis Vuitton advertises the exclusiveness, right, of their product, right? The eliteness of owning this product. Walmart, check this out, at a -4. Yet they do so well in their for-profit realm. So this is something interesting to consider is, would this be an anomaly if you can provide affordable merchandise, right? Now, we won't go into like some of the concerns related to oppressive practices of Walmart and all of those other things. That's a whole nother conversation for another day. But I'm just talking about the Net Promoter Score. Are people willing to waive customer service, even to the extent that it's a detractor? They are not happy with Walmart, but continue to frequent that place simply because it's affordable. Interesting, right? Look at Budweiser. I included this on here, not CBU friendly, but I wanted to point out a couple of things in terms of vices. Budweiser is saying they have was reported at a 30 Net Promoter Score, which is good, 0 to 30. That's really good. Marlboro is at a -3, right? And so that's interesting to see. H&M, some of you shop at H&M, they promote a 21 positive promoter score. Let's just look at a couple more. UPS. So apparently UPS has brand loyalty. Look at them, they're at 39. Wells Fargo at -2. Wells Fargo's promoter score took a huge hit following the recession of 2008, when Wells Fargo was determined to be giving out loans to individuals, particularly individuals of color that could not afford those loans, and Wells Fargo knew it and then ended up taking those houses back from those individuals and profiting from it during the 2008 recession. Starbucks, look at Starbucks, brand loyalty here, right? If y'all are Starbucks fans, you're saying, yes, I tell everyone about the latest drink at Starbucks and how amazing it is. So folks, this is what I'm talking about when we talk about Net Promoter Scores. This is why it matters, because it will perpetuate, right? Potentially grow your system, your agency, your program later on. Ultimately, here's what I want to give you in terms of leave you with, and I just want to let me just do a quick yes before at the end of the day here for our lecture. All right, you all have done great, and I know this is more of a technical lecture today than the previous two, but I hope you still found it useful. Ultimately, what we're looking for when we're talking about this wake analysis, right, interventions and determining the impact of services within an agency, is the notion of creating a culture of communication within our agency. Stephen Covey, all right, who writes an enormous amount of books on leadership and agency culture, discussed this notion of beginning with the end in mind. And ultimately, what my hope is that many of you are going to go out and you're going to say, I want to be leaders within my current agencies, right? I maybe want to serve others, or some of you, I'm sorry, I'm trying to stretch out the screen here and it's not letting me do that. Okay, there we go. Some of you are saying that you want to go out and maybe start your own private nonprofit. You want to start a private nonprofit locally or maybe even overseas, whatever the case is. What I'd like for you to take into account is I want you to start with the end in mind. Imagine, what is it ultimately that you want for the consumer, the marginalized population that you are serving? Okay, what is the outcome that you intend for them? When that ship passes through the water, what do you want that wake to look like? And then start moving backwards to determine how that's going to become a reality for your frontline staff, for your middle management, for your upper management, for the values of your agency, and for the mission of your agency. This is important to understand. And so if you notice, I just moved us backwards here, right? So let's move forward in this. So a mission statement, as we all know, should involve all levels of the organization, especially the client and consumer. If you are a child welfare agency dedicated to stopping child abuse, your mission must reflect your intended outcome for children and families. It has to promote unity, purpose, and passion. If you are going to rally your labor force around it, if you're going to rally the community, potential funders, the government, then they need to be as excited about your mission as you are. And then what you're going to need to do is you're going to disseminate that information and seek feedback, right, into your values. Your values should be brief, relatable, internally and externally. And you want to hire for the competency, aptitude, and the values that individuals are compatible with. So when you look at this, and we're pressed for time as social workers when we're hiring within our agencies, sometimes we look at this and say, we have expectations from our contractors. We have to maintain a particular ratio. We can't go over that. And therefore, if someone comes in and they've got an MSW, I'm hiring them. Well, there can be problems with that. See, hiring for the educational background is important. You are going to need someone with the proper degree, but that doesn't mean that they're compatible with the values of your agency. And so there's a saying in leadership that says, be slow to hire and quick to fire. And the idea behind that is you want to be intentional in your hiring. Over 12 years, 15 years of hiring now, one of the things that I look for and value sometimes even more than the educational background is compatibility with the values of the organization in which we're hiring them into. So if the values are for one organization is grace, then I'm looking for grace to manifest itself in the interview. If one of the values for another agency is empathy, then I'm looking for empathy to be demonstrated in the interview. If a value of an agency is organization, then I'm looking for evidence that this individual is organized in their interview. Okay, that goes a long way in terms of culture within an organization. In terms of leadership positions, you want your leadership positions at all levels, and I'm talking about middle, upper executive, to communicate their values of the agency and the mission via their words and action. So you can have someone that says, yeah, I believe that we should stop child abuse, and they show up every day late, and they present poor quality work, right? They judge others, they're unfair. How does that emulate the values of the agency, right? Good leaders seek feedback all the time. They do not just offer a one-directional experience with their employees. As we will learn later in servant leadership, they need to look for feedback from their employees, and they must commit to lifelong development. If our leaders stop growing within our organization, so does our organization. So leaders must continue to grow if the organization is going to continue to grow and develop. Our labor force, right? This is our most valued asset within our agency. It is not the computers. It is not the software. It's not the lighting, right? It's not the company cars. It's not the pay bonuses at the end of the year. It is our labor force. People are our most important asset, especially within the field of social work. If we do not invest in our labor force, if we do not invest in our people, they cannot invest in others. And so they are number one. In fact, we have to have buy-in and create a sense of purpose for our agencies. That's some of the tools that I was sharing with you that I shared with employees. And finally, they are going to be ambassadors for our agency, right? If you love where you're working, you're going to tell people about it. And not only are people going to be impressed with that, they're going to want to work there too because they see you happy and satisfied with their job. I recently saw some study that said over like 85% of people hated their job. How sad is that, right? That you go into work every single day and you hate your job when you're there more often than you are home, right? Dissemination of feedback in regards to client and consumer. And so ultimately, and this is what I'm going to say to you to really emphasize for you future leaders and current leaders within your organizations pertaining to social work, your client and consumer must be present and speaking into all levels of your organization. If you're a child welfare agency and you're thinking about adopting a new policy, you should have a child or a family present there to consider, for us to consider how that policy would impact those individuals, to offer recommendations and insight, because maybe we could do it in a better way, right? They need to speak into the mission, the vision, the policy, right? Imagine if you're serving individuals without housing and they're the ones saying, here's what I need in the community, and I need an agency who's willing to stand up to these values. And what if you mirrored the values of your agency off of direct input from your consumer? Pretty amazing, right? And so I just want to share these with you. As we continue to move forward, I'm going to unpack these concepts even more, but this was just sort of a overview, a preliminary lesson of what some of this wake analysis, right? The impact of services can look like within an agency. Obviously, we're not going to take care of that today. So what I would like to do, as always, is go ahead and close us out with our centering activity. So I want to thank you all again for the amazing input that you all have offered so far in the term. I appreciate you all. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and spend 2 minutes reflecting on God's presence with us and this particular scripture verse, right? And this comes from Galatians chapter 5. For you were called to freedom, brothers. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love, serve one another, right? Service of one another. And this is setting up an entry into where we're headed next regarding servant leadership. Our centering word for today will be service. So let's go ahead and put our hands and feet in a nice comfortable position. Let's try to push out all those worries and concerns that we have, right? Anything that is dominating our thoughts. Try to forget about what's coming after this lesson and try to let go of what came before. Let's just focus on God's presence with us in this moment right now. And I'm going to ask you to go ahead and take a nice deep breath. Close your eyes, and I'm going to keep track of the time. Okay, go ahead and take a nice deep breath and come on back. Welcome back, folks. I want to say thank you so much for tuning in. If this is you following the lecture today, if you're saying, Dr. Mako, I need answers, I was confused by this slide or that, or I just have general questions, or tell me more about this, that's absolutely fine. Go ahead and reach out to me via email. I look forward to being able to respond and connect with you. If not, that's absolutely fine, and I will see you in our next lesson. So thank you all so much. Okay, have a fantastic weekend. Take care.